You're on.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this version of the Metaphysical Mystery Podcast. Today, we're going to do something that many of you have asked for, is to get to know Terry and I as the host. And today, it's Terry's turn to be interviewed by myself. We're going to have an interesting time here for sure, knowing his history, some of his stories, some of his experiences. Man, there's some hair curlers in there for sure. As you can tell, he did that for a while, but that didn't last very long. But you're going to really enjoy, I think, this time that we have today. So welcome, Terry.
Hey, Tommy.
We're looking forward to getting this out there to everybody. So if you would tell everyone a little bit about your background, man, who you are and where you came from, what's it all about?
Sure. Well, I'm from beautiful Southern Illinois, a lot different than Chicago, and a little closer to St. Louis than I am to Chicago, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, my background basically, grew up very typical WASP family, I guess is what I would call it, and a couple of brothers and things. And anyway, I went into law enforcement, got a degree in law enforcement and another degree in telecommunications management, and worked for the city for a while as a police officer. And then I moved to the state, became an investigator, and did 28.4 years there, plus city time, so that's 30 something years, and still doing a little part-time work actually, but became an EMT even before I became a cop, and so had that medical background. And actually at the same time that I became an EMT, I also started in the dive rescue field, and started doing that throughout the county. And then eventually became the chief diver for the state underwater investigation unit.
Great. That sounds like quite a range of experiences you've had. As you go through them and you look back at some of those things, anything stand out for you around, let's say, the law enforcement or the EMS career to begin with?
Well, both of them, I think, help mold, my psyche and where I'm at with this stuff. Obviously, as a state investigator, you're constantly interviewing and interrogating people on a regular basis, and so you get a very refined technique in getting to your actual information you're looking for. I even got to the point where sometimes I would show up at certain places and people would just confess. They would start crying and just confess. People would come to watch that, and they're like, "What the heck is that?" And it's just the way it is. I don't know. Training and experience. I wrote a lot of things off as training and experience. When in retrospect, looking back on it, what I know now compared to what I knew then was, there was some metaphysical influences that I was fortunate enough to have acquired as a kid, and just used them. I just thought it was normal.
When did you realize, in looking back, one of the early experiences, if you will, where you utilized those metaphysical tools?
I think both in the medical field as well as in the police field. I always say to people, all those folks that are in police, medical, fire, they're actually very intuitive people, and police, for sure, because you're not using what we call, and I'm a defensive tactics instructor as well, and I've got lots of instructorial things. I think I'm an instructor in 48 different programs, not unlike yourself. And but I would tell people, as a police officer, if you're not using your sixth sense, is what we called it in police work, you're dead. I mean, you're going to have a real hard time. You get a sense before you're searching a house, there may be somebody around the corner, and you act accordingly on that, and you save yourself from, getting hurt. And even when you're walking up to a car on a simple traffic stop, you start to get these little signs and so forth. And we really try to hone that in on police officers when they're youngsters or cadets, brand new rookies, to really listen to themselves based on their training and experience, but which helps hone that. And I started using that right away. And I think that's a big part of how I'm able to do what I'm doing in a pretty effective way.
Yeah, most of our public safety people write that off as either a gut reaction or, as I would term it, the hair on your neck stands up.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, I say they probably should, but in a way, I've been asked here recently to maybe go to a university and teach a couple hour segment on the more esoteric things that a police officer might come across, or metaphysical things, and how they should react and what the do's and the don'ts are. So I think that's a real positive sign that people are taking note that there are things you're going to run into in law enforcement. Remember a neighboring county where a couple of deputies ran into a house. Well, they didn't run into it. They were called to the house, and then some of the things they saw in there, they said, this is not in our realm. They turned around and left. When you start seeing a little kid get pulled across a couch and there's nobody there to pull them, that's when you go, this wasn't in the academy. I really don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
It's amazing that's even contemplated that they're going to have you teach, because you go back 30 years. Had that happened 30 years ago, what would have been the reaction then?
It's, it would have been not even a starter. I mean, you wouldn't even have gone that way. It would have been a waste of time. But now, people are figuring it out. I think a lot of things like, TV type stuff that's out there, these investigative shows, and Long Island Medium and Tyler, the Hollywood Medium, those kinds of shows, that really tells people that, something's out there. And it starts to broaden people's horizons. So every little bit of that helps to just broaden that out and say, well, if that's going on, how can I use it in my work? And meaning not just police work, but any person's watching, maybe a doctor's watching and says, maybe I should at least think about that as a possibility. That's possible. A minister, that's possible too. And obviously for me, when I got basically retired out of police work, well, actually towards the end of my career, people were asking me, because I was crime scene tech and investigator and all this sort of thing, a lot of credentials, they started telling me, hey, I think I got a ghost in my house. Can you check this out? So why the hell would you call me for something like that? Well, cop, They go, well, you're the only one we know that would know anything about it. And I said, all right, what the hell? I'm used to not having a suspect to look at anyway, so what's a ghost? No big deal. Wasn't scared, just thought, okay, I'll go check it out. And sure enough, the very first one, there was a real bump in the night there, and we were able to remove it. And I had another person who was more involved in that metaphysical side of things at that time, and they kind of came in and kind of ran right chair with me on that one so we could get through it properly. But hey, it worked. So they were happy. And then of course you get one happy, they tell somebody else, and they tell somebody else.
It's amazing. I can just picture you trading in your cruiser for the Ghostbuster station wagon, showing up at work.
Yeah, that'd be good. And as I was assigned a station wagon one time, that was ugly. I preferred the Corvette, but
take that concept and share that amongst your peers so that they're accepting. Because I know traditional public safety and military and such, folks are just going to look and say, man, you're losing your mind. You're way too far out there for me.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say to the guys that are working the street, take a step back, take a deep breath. Let's see what all the possibilities are, because as a good investigator, you don't want to be led down any particular path. You want to let the evidence take you down that path. And that's where you really need to be open to everything that's possible. I know that we're going to have a guest upcoming who works for the National Missing and Exploited Child Network, and she uses psychics in assisting law enforcement. Now, a few years ago, we just shook our heads and said, that's a bunch of hooey. And I was certainly one of them, because I would get that when I was a dive team commander. People go, oh, they drowned and they're right here. Well, amazingly enough, we did find some right there. And I say it's another tool in the toolbox, and you shouldn't dismiss it just because you don't know how to use it. Let those who know how to use it, and let them work it the way they need to work it, as long as it's not getting in the way of evidence collection and things of that nature. What the hell? I mean, you can't get it into court anyway. So it's just going to be one of those things that will help you maybe move forward on the case. And I know of one fairly recently that they found a body been missing for 10 years, and it was done psychically. Mm-hmm. And it's been turned over to a different law enforcement agency than originally had it. And so things are going to go forward. I don't think there's any charges yet, but you know how that works with a homicide. It's going to take a while.
Right. It's funny. I've had mixed reactions and mixed results, if you will, with the psychics. You know, same as you on the dive call, where a person said you have to come here to find the child, and I was like, I don't think so, and the person wasn't there.
Right.
There are some really good success stories. So, given that, how would you suggest someone vets out these people to say who's credible and who's not? Because I think that's one of the biggest concerns.
Yeah, it really is one of the biggest concerns. I guess you have to understand how the psychic world works, or the mediumship world, because keep it in mind, psychics are doing a energetic reading. So they're getting pictures or sounds that are being given to them, even tastes or smells and so forth. And they're going to relay what they get to you. It doesn't mean that they're going to give you a physical address on a certain street in a certain town, and then down in the basement, 3 feet deep, is where you're going to find it. Although that has happened. And then a medium is different than a psychic. A medium is actually someone whose vibration, personal biofield vibration, can be raised high enough that a deceased person on the other side of the veil, as we would say, can lower theirs enough to meet in the middle and be that medium. And then you're literally talking to potentially the actual victim or a family member of the victim, that kind of thing. And I think that's where you can get some good stuff. But if people have been used by other agencies before and been successful, that's a telltale sign. And sometimes stuff will just randomly come to certain people. Energies, messages will come to them, and they may be asleep at night. And I always say it's right in that field of, like Peter Pan, never, never land. You're not quite asleep. You're not quite awake. You're in that never, never land, and both waking and sleeping. And those are the two times that you're most susceptible to hearing or getting visual stimuli from some other source. You know, people will say God, angels, demons, whatever it may be. But that's when we typically have that. And then they also talk about the witching hour, if you will, witching hour being from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. typically when you talk about it. That's just when everything is super, super quiet for the most part around the world, or at least where you're at in your time zone. And the energetics are not bouncing all over the place. And that's when people can hear things and see things that the other would have a difficult time with.
So I'm sure right now there might be some of our listeners going, what in the heck is he talking about? He talks to dead people through the veil and such. So how do we explain this to the skeptics that maybe they don't believe in anything further than this life, and that's just, it's a period. When you pass, you're done. How do we explain this to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, they're entitled to believe that. That's perfectly fine. But when a medium or something all of a sudden stops them and gives them 2 or 3 bits of information about their deceased father, there's no way they could possibly know that. They've never seen him before in their lives. Well, then you have to look at it and go, well, how the heck did they possibly get that? You know, some random exchange in a restaurant where a medium says, hey, your dad just said da, 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 da. And you're going, how the hell do you know that? You know, there's no freaking way you could know that. Well, if you see it once, you can blow it off as just coincidence, or somebody checked you out, or I don't know why they go to all that trouble. But I often tell them that people who have the ability to see beyond the veil or hear beyond the veil, or have one of your 5 senses beyond the veil, is much like how should I say, a telephone booth out in a desert. If you thought of it, and some people are too young to know what a telephone booth is, but the O's of the proper age, they know what a telephone booth is. And so for the younger ones, a cell phone fell on the dirt in the desert. You're that telephone booth. The medium is the telephone booth or the cell phone laying there. So if you find one out there, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to get out, you're going to try to make contact with a friend or a family member. You're going to pick up that phone and you're going to make that call. The medium is the telephone booth. And so if you randomly run into that person, somebody's going to attempt to make a communication with you. We all like to talk on this side of the veil. So you can imagine how frustrating it is to be on the other side and not be able to get word through to your family that you're okay, or, you know, that they need to find the will in the closet on the upper shelf, you know, that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of how it works. And I get called into that because, one of my things is, I'm a minister, and I take a spiritual sense of this. My doctorate's, in metaphysical sciences, mystical research in particular, but you really have to go in and research yourself. You have to look at the sources. For example, University of Virginia, they have a whole section just on the study of reincarnation. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent a lifetime putting that material together. He's deceased now, but that material is all still there at the University of Virginia, and some amazing stories that are very, very detailed and chronicled to the nth degree, to the scientific level, to show that that's a possibility, that you could have that. And I think a lot of it, if you don't understand that, you're going to have a hard time with the rest of it. Right. Because you got to understand that we make these secular trips into the earth plane, is what they call it, the metaphysical field. So, but it's just a lifetime that you choose to come into, and you're inhabiting a bag of bones, and your soul lives forever. And we all know that. I mean, that's in religions and so forth. But only in America does anybody raise an eyebrow when you talk about reincarnation. I mean, you get over to the East, in India and Tibet and all that. That's just duh. That's just common. So,
yep.
Anyway.
And the best way I've heard it described is we are energetic beings having a human experience. Best way you can. That's
a pretty common. Yeah, that's pretty much what they say. Yeah, we're jumping in and going to have an experience to grow your soul. People ask me a lot of times what the purpose of life is, and my answer has always been to learn to be a companion to God, the Creator.
So you've talked about reincarnation. I know you've looked at some of your history. Anything you want to share from that through some of the knowledge you've gained from in that area?
And as you get into this field, I think that people want to do a little self-research. If this is all true, then what about me? Where do I come from? How do I fit in? Where does that all happen? That did happen for me. And I went through a very long process of somebody telling me one thing, and another person telling me, and then an investigation that I undertook as a police investigator would, to come to a conclusion. And after 30 or 40 people telling me the same thing as far as a particular lifetime that came to them when they were tuning in, if you might say, to me, you get to the point where you finally kind of got to throw up your hands and go, okay, it must be true, because it was really difficult, and I don't know that I'm going to say what that lifetime was. I will say that most in the Judeo-Christian world would understand that lifetime. They would know of it, and I would say that that's about as much as I really need to say, because beyond that, I don't know that it makes any sense to say it, because a lot of people have had some really amazing lifetimes. I mean, somebody has had to been all these historical characters, and if you follow the reincarnation path, then we are our own ancestors. And so we are who laid down the history before this lifetime. So we've left clues for ourselves. We've been all these different characters. According to those concepts, we've been male, female. We've been black, white, red, yellow, brown. And I think if people understood that, given today's society, that they had been all this different things in the past, they might treat people a little bit better than what we're seeing currently.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you shared it that way, because the whole purpose of this podcast is to blend the metaphysical with the science. In describing how you traced back what people told you, you just didn't take it at face value, but actually led through an investigative process that took years to reach the conclusion.
Yeah, I don't think I even said anything to anybody for at least 3 years. And that was with me going place after place, different states, talking to different people. But they would even say to me, oh my gosh, I know what you are, who you are. And, whatever I'm doing. And these would be people who are very busy people and with credentials a mile long, and nobody ever charged me anything. It's just like, man, if you come here, I'll just stop what I'm doing and work exclusively with you. And I'm like, wow, okay. So how many of those do you have to get before you finally go, and I wasn't telling them anything other than my first name was Terry. Can you tell me anything about past lives? And so I went down that road, and I just said to God one night, I said, if this is true, you're really going to have to give me this a lot, and probably for my whole life, because, I'm an old hard-headed Dutchman, and I'm probably not going to believe it. And so far that's continued to happen over and over again. And then I learned to do some healing, because I've got all those credential checkoffs that everybody wants, the EFT, the Reiki master, the tuning fork guy, and then all the various clairs, the clairvoyance and clairsentience and, claircognizance. I do all of those things. And I'm also a remote viewer. I do those as well. Because I remember one time in particular, I had a doctor. She was a doctor of geology and music. I call her a rock music professor. But I was talking with her on the phone, and I said, "Hey, that's a beautiful piano there you got." And she says, "What?" I said, "The piano in there." I said, "It's really, really dark brown. It looks black, but it's really, really, really dark brown." And she goes, "Oh my God." She goes, "Is that a stand-up piano or a baby grand?" And I said, "It's a baby grand." And she goes, "It is a baby grand, and it is really, 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 really dark chocolate, but in certain light, it looks black." And I said, "Yeah, that's it." And I said, "But you got those pretty windows all through that area." I said, "It brings in the light." I said, "You got to love that." She's like, "Why? Yeah, yeah." And I said, "But why do you have so many pillows in there?" And she's like, "Oh my God." And I said, and there was dead silence. And I said, "No, I'm not going to look in your bathroom." She goes, "You can read my mind." She goes, "What do you got to do with a skill like that?" I said, "No, I don't know. Whatever I want, I guess." And later on, I had another friend that was in a city, some 250 miles away from me, and was talking with her, and I said, "Hey, why am I seeing one of these little fuzzy head troll dolls, like you see, they got the purple hair coming out, that kind of thing?" She goes, "Oh my God, I'm sitting in my car. It's hanging from my rear view mirror." She goes, "What else do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see, I think it's a blue or green ribbon that's right there." And she goes, "What else do you see?" And I said, "Well, it looks like a little, maybe a mermaid type doll, red hair. I can't tell if it's a fairy or a mermaid, but I think it's a mermaid." And she goes, "Well, what else do you see?" I said, "Well, the last thing is natural, like made of wood is what it is." And she goes, "Oh my God." She goes, "Where's it from?" I said, "Like, I don't know, Norway or something like that." And she goes, "Oh my God, I got to take a picture of this and send it to you. You don't got to believe this." And so she sent me a picture, and sure enough, hanging from that rearview mirror was a little troll doll, a little green ribbon, a little Ariel mermaid, little trinket with the red hair, and then a pair of wooden shoes that her mother had got her when she was like in Europe, Norway, Dutch land, or whatever, someplace over there, Holland. I don't know. And anyway, she was just like, it's a completely different woman. She's like, "Holy cow, what are you going to do with that?" I don't know, whatever I want, I guess. So that's just a little touch of many, many unusual things.
So I would tell the listeners, if you ever call Terry, don't do it while you're in the bathroom.
I try not to peek. But that's that whole remote viewing, though, is something that they've done in the military for years. And I'm sure CIA still does it.
Right.
I'm not sure of that. And it's where the Russians used to, look at us, we look at them, and, even things such as North Korea, if you can't see it with a satellite or get it from intel on the ground. I mean, the program that was out there, I think it was Stargate or something like that, where they would teach people to remote view, be on the East Coast and then remote view a room on the West Coast. And I think you had to be like about 85% accurate before they could even use you. And you would just simply sketch that all out on a board and then explain it as you go. I saw it done once on TV, and pretty interesting, where they could tell where the light switches are at and where kitchen was, different things like that. So it's pretty interesting.
Use this skill. What do you think the best use of this skill has been for you so far?
For me, I think to tune into a location, to see what's around a person. So if I'm going to do that, because a lot of times I'll get called for things that are kind of more dark, I'll call it that, because, you minister and you kind of do the spiritual thing. I love the science part of it, and I use that a lot, believe me, because I don't really get too scared like the Exorcist movie or something like that. But if I can tune into a location, take a look around, and see what their layout is, that's been helpful for me. And then also can tune in to see somebody or something face to face, but it's like a projection of your consciousness, and it sounds really weird, but if you've done it long enough, like anything else in life, it's pretty routine. You don't think anything of it. And I know that, you and I have interacted on that kind of an occasion from time to time, and it's always something fun, but I just want people to realize this is not all scary stuff, and we can really help a lot of people that way.
Right. For the listeners, this is actually based in quantum physics, in the realm of possibilities and collapse and such. So that's a whole avenue for a different day, because we could spend days alone on just that topic. But it's the new science that's emerged, and that's really where the future is in terms of understanding all this and making the bridge, so to speak.
Yeah. And, even with those folks, being able to do what people call distance healing on somebody. Somebody has an injury or an illness or something. And if you can project your energy there, which we know we can do that, because everybody is connected in this web of life. We're all one, as they talk about. So I think one of the easy things to do is, well, of course, I'll just run to an example where they took some human tissue or tissue from anything. It doesn't really matter. And you put a little petri dish in New York and put another one all the way over in LA, and you stimulate the one electrically in New York. And at the exact same time, the one in LA is also vibrating and stimulating at the same time. So what the hell is that? That means they're connected. There's no other alternative to that. And likewise with the Japanese professor who, started talking badly to water molecules, and they turned ugly. And then when he started talking love to them, they turned pretty, and so that's a projection of your energy, your thought pattern into something else other than yourself. And that's really, when you start talking what Jesus did, I mean, holy cow, this gets right into that, and people trying to figure out how did he actually do the healings he did. I think we're on the precipice of really understanding that. I think it comes down to almost a photonic transference of intellectual understanding, almost an intelligence, if you will, that will come from one with a high vibration to somebody with a low vibration, which may have an illness or injury, which are always going to be a lower vibration. And so if you interplay the high vibration on top of a low vibration, it dissipates the low, and a healing takes place. So I think you're going to find that's pretty much how it's going to come out. And everything looks like a miracle until you understand the science behind it. Right. And Jesus did say, what I do, you shall do and greater. Well, I believe him. And I think we're moving into that phase where humankind, if they've applied themselves, and I'm not talking about all the folks running around shattering windows right now and, setting places on fire. That's pretty low vibration in my book. But people who have really learned to tap into things bigger than just the physicality of life, to get into the mental and then the spiritual, those are where the high vibration things happen. And that's where you get those, what we might call miracles, wonders, and so forth.
You just mentioned that Jesus said at some point we'll all be able to do this. And in relation to that, most people are recognizing the time seems to be going faster. Mm-hmm. So why do you think right now this is starting to become more the norm and people are becoming more aware of this dynamic?
Well, I think there's a lot of kids being born into the world right now. They have a name for them. I don't know who makes these names up, and I'll just repeat them for practical purposes, I suppose. But they call them indigo children, kids that are coming into the world with more psychic abilities, more healing abilities, and their intuitiveness is very broad. And some of them are a little bit challenged because you're still in a world full of people that don't understand. And so I would say to the parents, if you are running across this in your child, don't be scared about it. Just reach out to somebody who could assist you in assessing what to do. And I know Tom and I, we end up in circles of people. We have staff people, friends of ours that help us do that in a very effective way. And they're all clinicians of some sort or another, therapists and nurses and whatnot. And so very, very seasoned people. And you can get a real sense of what your child is, in our opinion, and then you can get some do's and don'ts. But a lot of kids are being born into the world. They got other names for them, rainbow kids and crystal kids. I don't know. They come up with all, I don't know who makes, like I say, I don't know who makes them up. It doesn't really matter. I'm just saying really intuitive folks are happening. And biblically it talks about, in the end times, and I don't think it's really the ends, it's just the beginning of the next session, if you will, where the old men will dreams, and your sons and daughters will have visions. That's the time where they're talking about, where people are getting more intuitive. And even in the ancient times, in the, let's say, Old Testament times, which really isn't that ancient compared to the world, it's just, we think of it that way sometimes. Those folks that were prophets, those were kids that got identified typically by what we were rabbis, that they have an intuitive abilities. Their parents probably noticed it, and they ended up sending them to school. Maybe started with a local rabbi, but there was actually schools for people to become prophets, if you will. Mystery schools, some of them called it, but they would learn how to really connect with the higher powers, the other side. And that's how we got some of that scripture.
So talking about kids identifying these skills early on, do you recall when you first noted that you had some of these abilities, and how did you develop them going forward?
I've thought about that a lot. And I started studying, of course, I studied all the 12 religions and so forth because I have to. And also some of the meditation techniques and so forth, especially the Eastern culture. And I noted that some of the ways that the Hindus actually do their meditation, when I was a little kid, I was doing that. The exact same thing, the placement of your fingers, the placement of your tongue, the position you're sitting in, and in a dimmed or darkened place, or typically, but a very calm place anyway. And I was doing the very same thing. My dreams, I could do lucid dreaming. I still do lucid dreaming, but I can remember dreams from when I was a little kid. And I can kick them back in, and if I want to see them again, I can just replay it like an old movie. And so that's kind of fun. I do dream interpretation and that sort of thing as well, and that's a lot of fun. So yeah, I would say, looking backwards, I must have been in single digits when I was doing that. And my mom would say, "Hey, get your ass out of there and go out and play," and that's kind of stuff back when they kicked you out and made you eat at least a teaspoon of dirt a year so you could have your immune system and be effectively immune from COVID. So, that kind of thing. So yeah, I did that, but I never thought of it that way at the time. So,
when did you realize that you were, I'll put it, different than most kids?
My mom always said I was a sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
I was a sensitive, and I know my kids went over there the other day, and they were talking to my mom. Said they want dirt on dad. Every kid wants a little dirt on their parents, and they said, "Hey, tell us something bad he did, like this." And she's like, "Man, she goes, he didn't really do anything bad. He was kind of like an angel." And they're like, "No, he surely did something bad," and they couldn't get any dirt on me. And to this day, I think they hate me for that. But anyway, but even my son and daughter both had experiences, and they've, a lot of this goes down the genetic line. And for me, I was adopted as an infant, so I did not know my biological background until I was over 50. And then come to find out that, yeah, sure enough, on the biological side, both parents, I had a lot of go-go juice, so to speak, coming from both sides. And I think that, and likewise, my kids do too. My son is just an absolute superb astro traveler. And for people who don't know what that means, there's, like 7 energetic bodies around your body is what they've believed over in the ancient Eastern philosophies. But scientifically, we've also found that out as well. and he can project his astral body like nobody's business. And he can go not only on this earth plane that we're on, but he can go to the higher planes, and he can also go into the lower planes, where people might call that purgatory or hell or whatever, or heaven on the other side. But you're literally coming out of body. Your astral body is coming away. You're asleep typically, or in a very relaxed state, and you can just, one body kind of comes out of the other and then goes and does whatever at the speed of thought, if you know how to do it. And there's tons of people that do that, and people do it oftentimes at night when they're sleeping. They don't even know it.
Yeah, it's a hard concept for some people to grasp, yet there, at this point, there are some photos out there for when people pass, where they've actually caught the spiritual body leaving the physical body.
Yeah, Dr. Klinghardt, he's out in the Seattle area, I believe. He did a great study on light, and they had a guy who, voluntarily, he ended up inside a cage area for light. They were testing light, and they were showing his light on the graph. And then right when he died, because he was going to die, all of a sudden, the light instantly was gone. Wow. Figure that out. What was that left?
Right.
Because then the body's still there. So that was what most people would call the soul, your true self. And where are you headed to? Home. That's where you're headed. Occasionally not home, because I always say there's two different kinds of dead folks, probably actually three, but two basic ones. When people pass, probably, I'm going to guess around 80% go through the light. And then there's probably 20%, maybe a little less, that hang around, and they have something they feel like they really need to do, or some communication that has to happen, some unfulfilled reason they need to stay. And those are things that end up going bump in the night, what we would call ghosts. And certainly I get called to those quite often. And if you learn how to do that, you can tune in to those ghosts or entities, if you wish, and you can have communication with them. And and some people can tune in easier than others. Some people feel them, see them, some people hear them. It just depends on the individual, and sometimes it depends on that person too, where maybe they're not tuning into me, but maybe they'll tune into the person standing next to me, because it's almost like getting two radios, and they've got the two dials like the old radio systems. You'd have to dial it this way to get the thing to tune in right, and then dial it this way to make sure they're making that connection. And sometimes you're just in the mood for it, sometimes you're not. People who are intuitives, as what they call it, or empaths, sometimes they have a real hard time controlling that too, in the sense they're on all the time. And so they're constantly calling me going, hey, how do I control this? I'm hearing all this stuff and I'm seeing all this stuff, and I don't want to see all that all the time. And that in and of itself is a real challenge for many of them, to try to get that under control. And I tell them, you set your own hours. You're like the doctor. So I'm only going to look at you, on Wednesday night at 7 to 9, and that's it. And then I'm going to bed and get the hell out of here. You got to be the captain of your own ship, and you really have to be large and in charge and not get shoved around, just like you would in any other social setting. You don't get shoved around at the local cocktail party. You hold your ground, tell them what you believe and what you're going to do. And it sounds so silly. I mean, I get it. It sounds stupid, like you're talking to dead people, but it is what it is. And there's enough, I think, evidence now that we know that this is true. And even from the religious point of view, they used to talk about demons and so forth, and they still do. I think the Pope authorized a couple of years ago another 400 exorcists to be trained, because there was such an uptick in that sort of thing. So yeah, it's out there. If the church believes it, why wouldn't you? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you described roughly the 20%, and the vast majority of them are people that are either a little bit lost or feel like they have unfinished business here that they need to take care of, maybe protecting somebody or such. And that's the majority. But occasionally there's what would be deemed the more demonic or negative entities.
Yeah.
And I know you've had plenty of experiences and stories around that. Would you like to share a little bit about that type of work with folks?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on, and I've never really had a problem with removal. I just walk in and do what I do and get the hell out of there. I don't spend all kinds of time videotaping and doing that stuff you see on TV. It's some of that's a little demeaning to those that are past. They keep them around just for television or tours or, to make it some kind of fun land. I don't think that's the right thing to do. That's just from a pure human perspective. If somebody's in the wrong place, you got to direct them into the right place. And oftentimes it's as simple as telling them to look up and see their light and then think to go there, and then they go. In many cases, on occasion you'll find somebody who doesn't want to go there. And the difference between somebody who's what we would call demonic and somebody who's just maybe just a mean old son of a bitch, that's dead and wants to screw with you is different, because the demons tend to know things about you, where the dead folks, if they were stupid when they were alive, they're still stupid. If they were smart, they're still smart. They don't get really any enlightenment until they actually go through the light. But the demons are a different breed. They're a different kind of thing that is just really low vibration on very low vibration, but they have access to information. And some people will say there's no really demons. It's just people that are really separated from God. And because in the concept of everything being one, meaning one life, which is there's only one life in the universe, which is the creators, and we're all just thought projections or little bits and pieces of the creator, then that makes sense. If they believe in separateness, which demons typically do, they'll think they're their own thing. And sometimes they'll say, well, I was created by Lucifer. Okay, well, that's a misnomer too, because Lucifer wasn't really, even in the biblical sense, Lucifer's actually talking about Venus, the planet, because they had to put something in there, because people would say, well, if God is good, why does all this nasty stuff happen? Because you do it to each other and yourself. That's why it happens. And it's part of that karmic wheel, if you will, of reincarnation. And then they go, well, how do you get off of that? Well, you use grace. So, like Jesus used the term, if they crack you in the cheek, turn the other cheek, get cracked here. So I would say cracking here's, settling karma, letting them hit you on the other side's grace. And the law of grace is above the law of karma. So you release them and you from that particular karma. Is how that goes. We could go into tons of detail, because I teach a lot of classes, and I teach a lot of things on more metaphysical interpretations of biblical texts and other religious texts in a way that people go, oh, no, that makes sense. How come nobody ever told me that? Well, one, they're either scared to tell you because they'll lose their job, or two, they've never heard of it. And so it's pretty in depth. Even in the Vedas, you can get virtually word for word the Sermon on the Mount, printed 2,000 years beforehand.
So do you have an example of a case you worked on, maybe with a clearing? I know one that you told me about a while back, the Wiener dog. I don't know if you want to share that story, or if there's a different story that maybe could highlight what you're describing here.
Yeah, the Wiener dog, that's kind of funny. A lady who was psychic. She woke up at 3 a.m, typical witching hour, if you will. Got a message that they were going to get a package in the mail. She's bumping her husband, in bed, said, hey, write this down. It's like, living with a psychic, it's part of one of those deals. Okay, so he writes it down. She goes, we're going to get a package, and just disregard, it's got an evil wiener dog in it. It's a ceramic wiener dog. Okay, he goes back to sleep, probably said, this woman's crazy, but he'd been around her long enough to know that he better write it down. So he did. Well, a few days later, sure enough, here come a package. He sees it, opens it up, and inside there's a bubble wrapped wiener dog, ceramic wiener dog. And he goes, oh, screw, that's an evil dog. So he throws it in the trash. Okay. It goes off to work or whatever. The kids come home, and I think they had a 13-year-old, maybe a 6-year-old, something like that. They had a couple kids. But anyway, long story short, they end up at a supper table, and they're discussing this wiener dog coming in the mail, and the daughter says, hey, I saw that wiener dog. It wasn't in the trash. It was out in the yard. It was out in the grass. He goes, no. I didn't even, I knew what it was. I could see through it. Throw it away. She goes, no, it was out in the grass when I got off the bus, got home. He goes, well, what'd you do with it? And she goes, what's up in my room? I thought it was cute. Oh my God, go get it. So anyway, she goes up and gets, she goes, Dad, you better come up here. And what's that? So, goes up there and she goes, he goes, what's the problem? She goes, put it over here by the TV and now it's laying over on my bed. Well, that's a problem. So snatched up the wiener dog, put it back in the box and tape it up. The box starts moving down the hallway. Okay. They got a little bit of poltergeist activity, some spoons, knives, that kind of thing starts getting tossed about the room, that kind of thing. And he's like, oh, this is nuts. So we got to figure out what to do. So he grabs it up and takes it out to his shed and locks it up. There's no windows to the shed. Just he's got the only key, locks it in there. And so we'll deal with this tomorrow or something. And he comes back the next day and the thing's gone. It's the wiener dog's gone and the door's still locked. And they find the wiener dog in the house, of course. And I don't know what the hell. So he grabs that thing back up and he pours salt all over it, puts it down in a cooler and locks the cooler down, puts a weight on it and trying to figure out what to do. Same thing happens again. Find the dog. Then he says, you better call somebody. So somehow or another, they got my name. I don't know how. And so I started to quiz him over what was going on there. And this was it was a sexual demon. I don't think I ever told him that because I didn't want to scare him, but it was a sexual demon. And all you had to do was look at the clues, let alone its actions. But a wiener dog, and what do they call guys that, run around after girls, dogs, right? And also a wiener dog, that in and of itself, plus the fact that it went from TV to bed. And she was pre-pubescent or right at the starting of puberty, which is very common. You see that all the time in these kinds of cases. And so by this time, the dad had taken this thing and put it back in the cooler, and he drilled holes in the cooler and put a latch on there and a lock and all that kind of stuff, and locked it back up. And so while we were talking, I guess he went out and checked and it was gone. They never did find it. And he said, would this have anything to do with us calling you? I said, yeah, probably does, because you kind of get a bit of a reputation on the other side. And so I said, if it ever comes back, there's a whole process we have to go through to get, to put it to rest. Never has come back. It's been a couple of years at least. It's never come back. But I just had one the other day where they were, paranormal group was run around after a demon. They were seeing it in a house and got pinned in a bathroom, and they had me on the phone, and that happens a lot too. And they were yelling at it, doing their thing and whatever. So I said, would you like for me to talk now? And so I talked, and I just basically gave it asked some basic questions. Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. It didn't give me the answers that I wanted, which I didn't expect it to. And I gave it just a countdown. And when I did a 10 to a 1 countdown, got to 1, poof, it just dissipated, gone. And it hasn't been back since. So I really, it's not difficult for me to do those. For whatever reason, whatever gift you want to say it is, it's just really not been difficult. I know what I am, who I am. I know my spiritual connection. And I think that's huge. If you're going to get into this, don't get into it if you don't really understand who you are, what you are, and so forth, or you're going to get in over your head. And you could get hurt. You could physically get hurt.
I think that's great advice. People need to know their limits. You hear about people experimenting. Back in the days of us being teenagers, the Ouija board was a big thing. And
that's a big no-no. A lot of teenagers get themselves in big trouble with that. But what I found lately here is, because I get a lot of people from overseas and stuff that end up somehow with my number. I don't know how this works. God works in mysterious ways, but they'll end up with my number. And I have found people that are thinking they have an entity, but I run through a very quick process figuring that out. I think if you were sitting in a standard psychotherapist scenario, you'd probably have to be in there 3 or 4 sessions before they'd come to this conclusion. But I do it very, very quickly because I don't have time. I'm so busy. I don't have time. And so I'm seeing people with kind of a split personality disorders, the whole multiple Sybil type stuff, typically with just two, but they create kind of an alter ego, and it usually comes from a really stressful time in a recent past, and they utilize this alter ego to deal with some issues that they haven't dealt with internally themselves, and they think they've got a demon. But once I start running through my evaluatory process, you find out pretty quick that's not the case at all.
And I think that's important for people to understand. We've talked about clinicians and giving them some insights how it could possibly be an energetic metaphysical issue.
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally they're trained to look for the mental health, but it can go both ways. You could start off in the metaphysical and come back to the mental health.
I have no problem referring them to the proper mental health professionals. And a lot of times before I even talk to them, I'll ask them if they've been evaluated by a neurologist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, what prescription medications they may be on, because I'm working the spiritual side of this thing. The medical treatment side is for somebody else to do. And I hope that they would do the same courtesy if it's outside their scope. I hope they have a broad enough scope to go, you know what, I may have a friend that needs to probably talk to you and see if we can figure something else out, an alternative method. And that's once again, one of those bridges between the two professions that really needs to be explored. But they really have to have somebody they trust, somebody who's not a goofball, because there are, like in any job, there's going to be those goofy people that really don't have a sense of what they're supposed to be doing. They're not well trained. I mean, they don't have doctorates or anything in that area, and really limited experience, because I've seen people with less than a year's experience trying to go out and do demon removals and stuff, and they really, really just don't have the background to be doing that. It's dangerous for all parties involved.
So it sounds like we're definitely on the same page. We talk about team treatment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do a thing also called, because I'm a master hypnotherapist as well, and a regressionist, and among many other things, but I developed a thing called tactical imaging. And I know you're familiar with that. I think we put you through school on that. And tactical imaging is a methodology of a kind of a light hypnosis state, in a way, focused state, I might say. And I ask a ton of rapid fire questions during that period in a certain way to try to elicit from what they think the problem is. We boom, 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 we hone it down very, very, very quickly to what it really is. And it usually comes back to something as simple as they don't think they're loved. And they build all these things up, and they've hooked on to falsehoods that happened when they were really little, typically single digit, and it was given to them, this false doctrine, if you will, that they've latched onto, given to them by what I always call demigods, which is your mother, father, preacher, teacher, that kind of stuff. Anybody who's in perceived authority over you when you're a little one, and they've said something that you took as a truth and it really wasn't, and your whole life can be wrapped around that falsehood. And as soon as we break that and they understand it for what it was, life changes immensely. And it's a very effective tool to do it. And I use the EFT along with it in some cases, but it's kind of my version of it, which is more probably like your version. It's quick and to the point, and we're done. In, out, and done. I don't have time to mess around for days on ends. I just don't. Not that I'm opposed to coming back and talking to people, but they usually want reference on how they can understand this field better, because they get pretty excited about it if they've had a very successful situation like what you do or what I do, and they go, man, how can I learn about this? I think this is something I really want to know about. And one of the books I typically, and I'm not a really good book recommender, because I don't like to get recommended to. I like to find them myself. But if I read 100, I might recommend one, maybe 2 out of 100. I'm pretty particular about it. But one of them I do recommend oftentimes is The Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. I think that's an excellent starter book for people who are interested in the metaphysical field and just want to get started. Another book I like a lot is called The Veil. It's a short book. I call it a 2-evening book, maybe 3 for some people. And Blake Healy, he's a minister. I think last I knew he was out of Georgia, and he'd been able to see angels and demons since he was like 3 years old. and he takes the scary out of it, and it kind of empowers you, you know. And he said one thing, and this is how I would say people need to understand how you see things in beyond the veil. And he said it, I think, the best that I've ever heard. He said, it's like when you're in a car and you're driving and you're looking through the windshield out at the road. He goes, rather than look out past the windshield into the road, you want to stop short and look at the windshield. Mm-hmm. Make your focus something a lot closer right there, and rather than looking through it. And I think that's the best way I could explain to somebody, if you ever don't do it when you're driving, but you know, you're sitting in the driveway, you understand the concept of what he's talking about. And that's really how people do that. They're able to kind of shift their consciousness and their focus to something that's not seen. And so some people have the ability to see that with their actual physical eyes. Other people have to use the third eye to do it. But nonetheless, whichever way you get it or both, it's still an effective tool to help you see what's going on. I do remember talking to one guy who was very good at this, but he never told anybody. But he would walk through hospitals and he could see like demons on somebody's shoulder, and they would look at him knowing he could see them, and they would laugh, and then they'd poke somebody in the ear, and the person's doing this kind of stuff. And, you know, he finally said, I just got to get away from that, because, you know, but it was a legit thing. I mean, this guy's an elected official. He knows his stuff. And I do get called for a lot of really unusual things from people that are, you know, totally legit. You know, even today I was called to check on a home from an official who wanted it scanned to see if there was anything bad in that home before a purchase was made. And if so, can we clear it out? And that happens kind of quietly behind the scenes, as you can imagine. You wouldn't want your average Century 21 realtor or you know, whatever, making that known. And, but, you know, ask realtors that have been around a haunted house. It's damn hard to sell. And people get in there and they just feel creepy. And until that's cleared, nobody's going to want it. Or if they do get it and then they find out afterwards, then they're pissed off at the realtor for not. And in some states, it's in the law. If somebody's died there, they think it's ghostly, you have to disclose that.
Absolutely.
And I don't know what it is in Massachusetts. I mean, you do have Salem there, so
yeah, we have disclosure.
You would think it would be in Massachusetts of all states, but you know, nonetheless, that's kind of the deal.
Just thinking, I want to create the TV commercial that goes with this. This would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit of my life. I mean, it goes on and on. And so that's why I get called to talk about a lot of these things, and we can go into any kind of topic for hours on end if necessary.
So we've covered a lot in this session. If we get said for the next 30 seconds, what did we miss? How do I summarize Terry? What would you say?
I wish I knew. This crazy son of a bitch who does all these crazy things, but is actually, you know, just a Packer fan who'd rather have a beer and eat some potato chips and watch the game. So I don't know. You know, I just, it's not what I plan to do in my retirement from law enforcement. Coming from that background of, you know, crossing T's, dotting the I's, making sure everything's just so, being on the stand, you know, having to swear to the truth and nothing but the truth over and over and over. I know what the truth is, and I've never had a mental problem. I've never had any of those issues. This is all stuff that I have flushed through to my satisfaction, that it's real and that more study needs to be done in all these areas. But I think we're really starting to open up the world with science, honestly, this world of spiritualism in one form or another that I'm very well versed in, bringing that forward and then applying science to it. That's just absolutely fascinating to me. And I find it as intriguing as the next person. So when we have these guests that come on here, I'm learning just like everybody else. And I love to hear their stories. And when we get called to talk, people ask us, what have you seen on the podcast that's really cool? I mean, you've had some, off-camera interviews. Well, hell yeah, we've had off-camera interviews. We've talked to these people. We oftentimes know these people really well. We know their stories because they're very interesting. They're authentic people that bring an element of realness to this thing, in the sense that it's not a TV celebrity. It's somebody who does this either as their living, or it's quite a hobby to have, but or it's something they've just done since they were children, and they're willing to share. And I think a lot of people have done these things but are not willing to share because they don't want to get, it's like the guy who sees the UFO. Well, enough people have seen UFOs now. They're a little more likely to say, yeah, I saw a UFO. And but in the early days, after the Roswell type scenario, nobody wanted to say anything because you were a complete loon if you did. And even today, with all that's out there, some people are reluctant to say anything. They just don't want to put themselves in that place. Their employer might not like it. Their family might not like it. Their religious background might not allow for it. So there's a lot of reasons. But where do you go when you've had one of these events? And I remember teaching a group of 60, 70, 80-year-olds one time, and everybody in the class had an event. They all raised their hand. And I remember one lady, had this event when she was like 16, I believe it was, where she had seen a grandparent that came back and was standing right there. She had a conversation with him and the whole bit. And I said, so have you never told the story before to anybody? No. She goes, where was I going to tell it? If I told it at church, I was a devil worshiper. If I told it to my mom and dad, they'd think I was nuts. If I told it to my employer, they'd fire me. So I just kept my mouth shut. I've never had a forum to actually come and say, hey, I saw this stuff. Well, I hope that this podcast is legitimate enough that we can all have a broad enough mind to go, you know what, this is a report from their experiences and the way they see it, the way they felt it, the way they heard it, and we can take it from there, if this person's legit or not legit. And that's what this is all about. It's how we grow as a society and as individuals. Just take all this data in and figure it out for yourself. If it works, great. If it doesn't, move on. Go watch the Packers with me. For somebody who's there who's a Patriots fan, I mean, that's just out of this world.
And the legitimacy is so huge. I mean, that's what we based our whole careers on, was reputation, legitimacy. Yeah. And so to walk into this world, we're vetting people as we go along, the guests we bring on board, because this is our reputation as well as the information of sharing.
None of us want to be made fun of for being idiots and being easily fooled, and we're not easily fooled. Neither one of us. We've both been out there, and we've been told all kinds of horse crap through the 30 years of doing it, and you can pretty well cipher out the right from the wrong, the stuff that's not correct, and go from there. We've had to, because otherwise you would not be considered successful in the field. You'd have been fired from a long time ago if you were doing crazy stuff, because you got sergeants looking out after you, got lieutenants looking after you, got captains looking after you, got chiefs or sheriffs or directors. I mean, you got so many people looking at you, and everything you do is on computer. It's all on camera. And so, so no, you got to go legit from the get-go. And then when you're retired, hey, you got a little free time, and you can say, well, here's some of the weird stuff I had. And that's what we're doing, applying what we've learned and reaching out to other people who've had weird experiences, or, maybe it's just new scientific breakthroughs that people are unaware of.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story in the way you have today. Hopefully it was enlightening for our listeners. I think it's some great insights, a very vast background of experiences. Many people have a single or, a few, but you have a whole bucket load, to put it nicely. And a variety thereof. So there's a lot to be learned from you and from this podcast. So we really want to thank our listeners for being here for us. There's going to be a lot more coming down the road. If you have any questions, thoughts, anybody you'd like to see or hear from, the email is tmm@gmail.com, and the metaphysical mysteries.com will be the website. So please feel free to visit those, leave us a comment. Hopefully you're liking what you're hearing, what you're seeing. We just want to keep improving this and give you the best product we can, sharing some information, sharing some experiences, and normalizing what's been out there for a long time and letting people know, no, it's okay. You have a place you can come and talk about it.
Yeah.
Terry, final thoughts?
I would just say for those that are coming, I mean, we've got some doctors, some MDs coming up. One of them's going to be doing some biofeedback. Tom's in that realm. And, what would have been considered kind of woo-woo back in the day, it's pretty typical now. And he's got some pretty advanced biofeedback for people who need to get some additional assistance. So we're going to focus on that. And he's out of the Orlando, Florida area. So we get him from all over. So, somebody, let us know, and we would be happy to tap into whatever they've got.
Great. Well, thank you again, folks. We will see you at the next podcast.
See you next time, folks.